I'm a very easy guy, so my talk has 3 parts, a beginning, a middle, and an end. In the beginning, I will tell you what democracy is and why democracy, as I will use that word, is grounded in a certain set of values. There are 3 of them. I will also tell you that there are 3 villains in my story. They are not Putin, Erdogan, and other people, or Trump. They are different villains, somewhat more dangerous villains. That's going to go down in the second part, and I will try to create a kind of immune system against this particular threat against democracy, a threat which is a threat to our very own minds and to the human being as such. And I will conclude with a brief defense of a political system I call co-immunism. No, it's not communism, it's co-immunism. Co-immunism is democracy grounded in an unquestioned assumption of human rights. But we need to work our way to that view, to co-immunism, otherwise it sounds too much like communism. So part 1, the beginning. What is democracy? So as I said, I used the word democracy in a certain way. The word democracy has many, many meanings. It picks out a form of government. It refers to a kind of administration, to a system of information processing on a bureaucratic level, to a representation of the people's will, etc. So the term democracy means many things. What I have in mind when I talk about democracy as a value, something which is intrinsically valuable, I refer to really 3 pillars. And the 3 pillars are, number 1, human rights, number 2, freedom, and number 3, equality. So I will talk about human rights, freedom, and equality, and I will defend them. And now my 3 villains enter the stage. Okay, so they say this all sounds very nice, and maybe democracy is a kind of value system and not just an administration or a form of government. Maybe there's something deeper going on in democracy, but wait a minute, okay? Villain number 1, pessimism, says, human life is so complicated that we will always wind up with dictatorship and something which goes against democracy. Democracy has no survival chance. This is what the pessimist says. Then we have my second villain, the relativist. The relativist says something like this. Well, you're talking about democracy and human rights here, but really you're just defending Western hegemony or imperialist standards. There are no universal human rights. There is no meaningful concept of justice, equality, and freedom. All there is are local decisions to behave in a certain way, right? So the Russians do their thing, the Chinese do their thing, and maybe the Europeans, whoever they are, do some other thing, right? And the Americans, they do their thing, and they're also exceptional, etc. So that's the relativist. There are really no universal values, and whoever believes that there are universal values has a will to power, wants to dominate some other group. That's the relativist. And finally, the worst enemy, but also the easiest to defeat, the nihilist. What does the nihilist say? Well, the nihilist believes that fundamentally there are no values, not even local ones, okay? There are no Russian values, no Chinese values, no German values, 0 values, okay? So that's the nihilist. And you see my villains get gradually worse. The pessimist kind of still has some kind of hope, but is in despair. The relativist wants to use us in his own interest. Think of the Putin interviews, for instance. That's a nice case of relativism. And the nihilist wants to say, forget about all of this. This is just a ridiculous, meaningless show. Okay, it's a show about nothing. Okay. Let's get started. So we need to meet our villains on their own ground. Let's build up our immune system. Part number 2, the middle. Okay, that was the opening. Now we come to the middle. PRN, those are my enemies. It does not stand for the People's Republic of North Korea, though. Okay, PRN. Let's start with number 1, pessimism. So why would anyone be a pessimist? So here's an idea that motivates pessimism in many people's minds, including my own one. So I know the temptation. Here's how pessimism goes. There is widespread moral, social, and political disagreement in any community you know. Pretty much everybody else agrees with everybody else on pretty much everything when it comes to moral, social, and political issues. And this also holds about yourself. You disagree with your former self, you disagree with your future self. So there's basically only disagreement about, say, abortion, same-sex marriage, the best form of government, vegetarianism, feminism, etc. People talk about these things, and they're in widespread disagreement. Now, doesn't this make it unlikely that there are universal values. And even if there were universal values or moral truth that could ground our insistence and commitment to human rights, even if there were such truth, we could never know what they are because there's too much disagreement among humans. We'll never sort this out. This is what the pessimist says, okay? But now let's take a closer look at that position and start from a very different angle. Is there really so much moral disagreement among humans as the pessimist typically imagines it? I gather that this is false, and here's why. Think about the opposite case. I think we all agree, obviously including all Chinese citizens or Russian citizens, etc., fundamentally agree that we should not torture children just for fun. We probably also agree that we shouldn't torture sentient creatures just for fun. We also agree that we shouldn't walk around our cities and just hit people in the face for no reason. Okay? We also agree that civil war is worse than peace. Even if someone profits from civil war, say a warlord, the warlord knows that something's wrong. It's civil war. Okay? So if you know what the word civil war means, or if you know what the word torture means, or what the word rape means, if you know what these words mean, then you know that they do not characterize something that is good. Okay? So this is fundamental agreement among all humans. Also, there couldn't be any kind of disagreement without fundamental agreement. Here's a very simple argument from a different context, right? So imagine we disagree about all sorts of things. In order to disagree, so that I can say something and you say the opposite, in order to disagree, we have to speak, for instance, the same language. You tell me something that I can understand, and I communicate back. So we agree, for instance, on the fact that we exist, that we can speak, that we communicate, that I have 10 fingers, etc. So for any disagreement, there's going to be a higher amount of agreement in the world, okay? You can even show this mathematically, as it were. In philosophy, we call this the principle of charity. It's impossible to imagine disagreement without a wider set of agreement, okay? It's a wonderful philosophical insight that you have to bear in mind, also in the moral case. No moral disagreement without moral agreement, right? Trivially, imagine I morally disagree with you on a particular kind of issue. So I'm for same-sex marriage, and I just celebrated what went down in Germany, and then I meet someone, probably no one from this room, I don't know, but I meet someone on the streets of Berlin, and he says, well, I'm all against it, terrible. Okay, so I meet like a homophobe. Fortunately, I never meet them, but I'm also not looking for them. So, but imagine I meet this homophobic person, and I get into a fist fight, right? I mean, that's not disagreement, that's a fist fight. So as long as I disagree with the homophobe, there's room for an exchange of arguments, and therefore moral agreement. Then we both agree that fistfights are bad. And that's a good starting point, right? Build it up from there. I think it's not that hard to go from fistfights are bad to homophobia is bad for certain people, homosexuals, and also me. I find this generally repulsive. Okay, so it's bad for humanity, and it's pretty much like fistfighting. Okay, homophobia looks a little less violent from the outset than fistfighting, but it's really not. It's a very violent thing. So we can build up from there. So the pessimist is fundamentally defeated because the pessimist cannot generalize on the basis of local moral disagreement to fundamental disagreement among humans. Also, this has never been done. There's always been in the history, in the entire history of ideas, there's always been the claim that people who live elsewhere, in different cultures, as we say, are probably very different from us. I mean, look what they do over there. I mean, every single culture and every single local group actually believes that, look what they do over there. I mean, that's what we believe in Bonn about Berlin, right? Well, unfortunately, I think Berliners stopped caring about us, but we still kind of care. We still feel insulted that the government moved here. Okay, but be that as it may, we always have the fantasy that the others are super different, but they're really not because they're human beings. Okay? So moral disagreement rests on moral agreement. The pessimist is defeated fundamentally. Now enter the relativist. What do we do against the relativist? The relativist says, to quote Frank Underwood, the president from House of Cards, one of the best TV shows right there, out there on the market right now. So to quote Frank Underwood, sorry, spoiler alert, there is no justice, only conquest. This is what the relativist says. There is no justice, only conquest. There are no moral values. There are no human rights. There are only strategies that make it look, that pretend as if there were human rights. So when the United Nations declared the Universal Declaration of Human Rights in 1948, this was an imperialist strategy. Okay, it doesn't look like that. They say all human beings are born equal and free, etc. They don't specify. They don't say this is for Americans, right, or for Europeans. They speak about everyone. But really, what they mean is it's good for us if everyone subscribes to this. Okay, then we can sell whatever Diet Coke to Africa. That's the idea, okay, of the relativist. They really have an agenda. Arguably, the counter-declaration has an agenda, so that's a little bit difficult, so that we know there are many declarations of human rights. However, say the Cairo Declaration, for instance, of universal human rights also has some universal human rights in there, okay? It's never fully local. Wherever you have the notion of a human right, which, by the way, you will also already find in ancient Chinese philosophy, and of course in India, etc., this by itself is already universal. Wherever you have the notion of the human being, you have the notion of universal moral rights, inviolable human dignity, etc. That is extremely widespread, okay? So the relativist, again, tells us something that's not the case. When I say I want to help you, I really have a strategy. I don't want to help you. So the relativist wants to reject kindness and create new borders. That's what the relativist wants to do. Donald Trump is a relativist. Vladimir Putin is a relativist, very clearly, right? I mean, there's a Russian democracy, there's an American democracy, etc. There is no such thing on the level of values. There's an American administration, there's a Russian administration, but there's no American democracy, no German democracy, there's just democracy when it comes to values, okay? So that's all false. Goodbye, relativist. One more villain in my game, the nihilist. Now, he's really evil, so we need to do something against the nihilist. Here's what the nihilist says. You think there are universal moral values that are at the bottom of democracy, that are the foundations of democracy in your sense of the values of democracy, but there really are no values at all. Reality is just physical reality plus evolutionary biology, say. Okay, so all there is a swarm of particles, electromagnetic radiation, and certain animals. And the animals have, of course, survival interests, and in order to look good in their own eyes, they invent the fantasy of values. This is roughly the story of Friedrich Nietzsche, who says, well, there might be values, but what is, I quote him now, the value of these values? And Nietzsche says, they have no value. Okay? The values themselves have no value. They only serve a certain function in the survival struggle of human beings. They are a function of the will to power, as he puts it. Okay? A very widespread idea, which unfortunately is driving large chunks of the so-called science of sociology. I call this battering ram sociology. So the idea that you can understand society as a whole as nothing but a power struggle. Okay? So that would be the nihilistic vision of morality. There really is no such thing, no values whatsoever, just particles and animals. Okay. Now, what do we do against the nihilist? And this might be my biggest weapon, so I come to my conclusion, co-immunism. Okay. Now that you see what the villain is, and what the villain wants to say, and why it's dangerous, I want to give you a kind of immune system that you already have. I'm not telling you news, I'm just telling you what you already know. And what you already know is this. You experience your everyday life, every single situation, as value-laden. For instance, in this particular situation, everyone listening to what I'm saying, right, in this room or maybe on their screens, is in a situation where certain things can be done and other things can't. I hope you don't start a fist fight right now. I feel like no one is going to attack me right now, so that's great. And the entire situation comes to me in a moral or in a value form. Values are already in that situation. Imagine you go to a dinner. There's a certain atmosphere. We all know that there are atmospheres. It can be a good or a bad atmosphere. People can be kind, people can be suffering, people can be violent. And we humans just have a sense for that. Human experience as such, the way we are as humans, puts us in touch with the value of others. So qua human being, and so far as we are human beings, our experience is the ground of our values. That is why things such as suffering, okay, play a crucial role in the justification of human rights and of ethics in general, because suffering is so important in human life. We know we will all suffer. But there are other very valuable experiences, not just the bad ones, as it were, suffering. Suffering isn't the only origin of ethics. There's also something like giving birth or falling in love. There's good, value-laden experience. There are different kinds of value-laden experience. To be in war is horrible, always, also for the soldier. The soldier doesn't think that this is great. It's great for the soldier insofar as the soldier has to fight this war and plays his or her role for whatever reason. But no soldier thinks that this is wonderful, like in the same sense in which I enjoy a concert when I'm here. Okay? So you can't enjoy war in that particular sense because there's human experience. And human experience is the ground of our ethical judgments. And you cannot reduce it to anything deeper. Let me illustrate this with a very simple thought experiment again. So imagine you would really conclude that all there is the physical universe and certain animals that evolved in the physical universe, say us, the human animal. We evolved somehow, right? And all there is to say about the human being is what you can learn from biology. And what you can learn from biology about the human being does not come with values. You can understand the behavior of humans, you can understand their makeup, you can also understand their suffering and their kindness, all right, but it doesn't give you a justification for your values. So this is one way of being a nihilist. However, even if our value experience is, of course, grounded in our experience as human animals, this does not mean that it can be reduced to that experience. In one word, the human experience of value is irreducible. It is an independent reality. It is something that we can't deny. However, here's the supervillain in one word. Okay, here's what's driving both the pessimist, the relativist, and to some extent also the nihilist. The wish to deny one's own humanity, as the American philosopher Stanley Cavell has called it, and he thinks that there's nothing stronger in humans than that wish. We want to get rid of our own humanity. Why? Because we are responsible. We are fundamentally responsible for the achievement of democracy, where democracy is nothing but my name for a system of universally valid norms, and these universally valid norms apply to everyone, regardless of where they come from, how they look, etc. Just think of the human rights. So I want to conclude with a very simple call to action. Defend the objectivity of your own experience, and don't let the pessimist, relativist, or nihilist into your home. We need to create a community that is immune to these kinds of unjustified doubts. That is a democracy based on co-immunism. Thank you very much for your attention.